Hello students, so today we will be starting with another new topic. The new topic name is forms of education. You see, this chapter is present in the education book of class 11, and today we will be understanding that what are the forms of education. In the last class we have studied about what is the meaning of education and how education is a very important part of our life. So today we will be understanding the forms of education, and so let us discuss this topic. Here, you see interpretations of education. Now, what are the different interpretations of education? You see education as a lifelong process. If I talk about education, education is from birth till up to death. There is no end of education. We are educating ourselves day to day and from months to months. So there is no ending process of the education. Also, on the other hand, education is the acquisition of experience comprising the whole life of an individual. Formal education has a beginning and an end. It has its definite aim and objective, duration and limit. In our today life, we acquire education through experiences, modify ourselves, solve problems of our life. Thus, education is considered a lifelong process of striving for perfection. Now, if I talk about education, first of all, education is termed to be the acquisition of experience. Education is termed to be the acquisition of experience. Also, on the other hand, there are two types of education: formal education and informal education. Now, if I talk about the formal education, in the formal education, there is a beginning and there is the end. Now, what do you mean by formal education? Formal education means inculcating of the degrees. Like, for example, we have completed our metric examinations, our HS examinations, then college degree comes, the university degree comes. These are all examples of the formal education. Also, on the other hand, education is also termed as the inculcating of experience. The more we will be experiencing our life, the more knowledge we will be getting and the more education we will be inculcating. Also, on the other hand, we get education from other people itself, which means we gain experience through other people itself. How? The way we communicate with other people, the way we will be interacting with other people, this is also a part of experience, also known as the part of the education process. Also, on the other hand, if I talk about education, education has definite aims and objectives. Why education has definite aims and objectives? So that we can go through the education, so that our education continues in a very proper way. Also, on the other hand, education is a long process. Why education is considered to be a long process? Just because we strive for the perfection or through the excellency. To perfect ourselves, to make ourselves a better human being, we consider education as a lifelong process. Also, you see here, education as a modification of human behavior. Now, education is termed to be the modification of human behavior. How? You see, when we were born, from the first day itself only, we are getting education from our parents itself. Why we are getting education from the parents itself? So that we can modify our behavior. Afterwards, when we go to school, from there also we learn a lot of things from the teacher itself. The teacher also modify our behavior. They give us a proper education. Now, after birth, a baby behaves out of his instinctive tendencies. Education helps in the process modification of behavior. It is education that gives rise to desire and needs for change. Now, if I talk about education here, what do you mean by education? Education gives us the desire and the needs for change. You see, if an individual is getting proper education, he or she will be changing himself or herself for better. Education means change. Education means needs and desires for change. Also, on the other hand, the process of modification of behavior is a continuous one that covers the whole life of man. Education identifies itself through the process of modification. Now, education is also an example of modification. You see, it is an acquisition of experience. Also, it is an example of modification, which means through the education identifies itself, which means education identifies us through the process of modification. The more we will be changing ourselves, modify ourselves, the better education we are getting. So this is the part of the education as a modification process. Also, it is a continuous one. First, we have understood education is a striving for perfection. Also, it is a continuous one. Here, education as an instrument of social change. Society changes constantly. Education helps to bring such constant changes. Now, if I talk about education, education is all about social change. Now, why education is all about social change? It is comprised to be as a change. Society changes just because the people in this society, in those society, are acquiring knowledge. They are acquiring knowledge and experience. So, as a result, the society is changing. The society is modifying itself. Also, on the other hand, education means constant change. Education is also termed to be as the constant change. It helps the children to know the concept of right and wrong and what should be done and what not. Old custom, faith, and beliefs can be modified through it and bring about progressive changes in them. Now, if I talk about our country, India, in country, most of the people are with old faith. They are with the traditional values. Also, on the other hand, education is a part of advancement. As education is a part of the advancement, education has removed many social evils, such as the child marriage, also the sati system were being removed after the advancement of the education. So, education helps in the modification of a particular society. Also, education brings progressive changes in a particular society. It brings progressive changes in a particular society. So, this is what education is, the modification of a society. Now, types of education. Here we will be understanding what are the types of the education. As I have told you about the types of the education before, there are formal education and informal education. Here, there are three types of education, yes. Now, for the first, we will be understanding the two types of education, formal education and informal education. First comes the formal education. It is provided in an educational institute in an organized way. This education is consciously planned with a particular end in view. There are fixed courses of study, fixed timetable, and the period of courses. Now, if I talk about the formal education has its aims and objectives first of all, and second of all, in a formal education it means inculcating of degrees. We are giving metric examination, we are getting the degree of HS, we are getting the degree of bachelor's degree and master's degree. These are all part of the formal education. Also, on the other hand, formal education is done in a very disciplined way and in a continuous way. Also, on the other hand, it is being done in a planned and proper way. So this is the example of formal education. Also, on the other hand, qualified teachers are appointed to teach children in every step of this education. Formal rules, methods, and disciplines are maintained. Now, if I talk about the formal education is being given to the students itself. And who will be carrying out the formal education? The teachers itself. Yes, qualified teachers are being appointed so that formal education can be given to the students itself. Also, on the other hand, in a formal education, different methods and discipline are being maintained. Following methods and discipline are maintained and rules are being followed so that the formal education can be done in a disciplined way and in a constant way. Also, students' evaluation are done on the basis of examination. After passing the examination, certificate, degrees, and diplomas are awarded. Now, evaluation is the very part of the formal education. Now, why do we do evaluation? Now, what is the meaning of evaluation? Which means testing the student, that how much the student has learned itself. So, as a result, this is the part of evaluation. Why do we carry out the process of evaluation? So that we understand, we get the feedback that how much the student have learned. So, this is the part of the formal education, and with those, the process of evaluation only, the students will be getting the master degree, the bachelor's degree, which means award and diplomas are being given to the students through the formal education. The formal education characterizes the capability of a particular individual. It characterizes the capability of a particular individual. Also, on the other hand, it also tells that how much the student have learned, which means it carries out the feedback of a particular student. I hope you have understood about the formal education. Now, here we will be understanding about the informal education. Also, if I talk about the formal education, it is a fixed course of study. Just remember one thing, formal education is a fixed course of study. Everything is fixed in a formal education, unlike the informal education. Now, here we will be coming in the informal education. It is a more comprehensive than formal education. It is not pre-planned. It is a type of education which a child gets while moving and living in the community with other persons. Long time ago, During the period of Mahabharata, during the period of Ramayana, there was no formal education, there was only informal education. As a result, informal education is a very comprehensive term. Why? Because it is not pre-planned. It is not pre-planned, it is not disciplined. Means people or any student can get informal education from the community itself. Informal education is a part of experience. Means whatever experience we are getting from day-to-day life, this is an example of informal education. Also, on the other hand, agencies of this education are home, religious and social institution, radio, newspaper, etc. Now, informal education is a part of casual education. Informal education is a part of casual education. Also, on the other hand, if I talk about the informal education, like small social institution are there. If we read newspaper, if we read any kind of books, if we are getting a part of small education from a teacher itself, these are all example of informal education. Also, on the other hand, if we are a part of a religious group, if we are at home, this is also an example of informal education. For example, if I talk about education from our home, we are getting education from our parents for the modification of behavior, is an example of informal education. Also, evaluation is done by observing social adjustment only. No degree, no diploma or certificate is awarded at the end of such education. Now, evaluation is done. Informal education also evaluation is done. Also, in informal education also evaluation is done, but no certificates are being awarded to the students. No diplomas are being awarded to the students itself. So, here we have understood about what the formal education and the informal education. I hope you have understood regarding the difference between the formal and informal education. Also, we will be getting more information that what is the difference between the formal and informal education. But right now, we will be understanding about the non-formal education. Here, what do you mean by the non-formal education? It has developed as a result of inadequacy of our present system of formal education. The concept of non-formal education was developed by International Commission in its report entitled Learning to Be. The Commission suggests that alternative arrangements should be made for those who cannot attend formal education. Now, what do you mean by non-formal education? Non-formal education is the result of inadequacy, which means most of the students are still there who are not getting access to the formal education. They are not getting access to the formal education. As a result, that time the International Commission has declared the term non-formal education. Now, non-formal education is the part of education where some of the education can be given to the student itself so that the student can learn something and can inculcate some basic skills. Also, on the other hand, it is felt that in spite of the vast financial resources being spent on education, majority of people do not get the desired education. As a result, government introduced non-formal education. Now, the government has financial resources, vast financial resources, but still some of the students are not getting access to those financial resources and are not getting access to those formal education system. As a result, this term comes the non-formal education. Now, as a result, government introduced non-formal education. Government introduced non-formal education. Now, in its report, given by the International Commission, here the non-formal education means learning to. It may come in MCQs as well that what has the International Commission preferred to be the non-formal education as learning to be. Learning to be means those students who wants to learn something, who wants to get a proper education but are not getting access to the formal education are termed as the non-formal education system. Here, non-formal education is organized and pre-planned but not strictly formal. It aims an all-round development of man. It is learner-dominated where all the efforts are being made by man to make it easily available to the learner. Now, if I talk about non-formal education, non-formal education is given to the students itself. Also, each and every student will be getting access to the non-formal education. But non-formal education is pre-planned, it is disciplined, but it is not disciplined in comparison to the formal education. It is not at all properly planned in comparison to the formal education. It means it gives an all-round development to the particular individual. Why non-formal education came into existence? So that proper development can be given to a particular individual, or proper skills can be given to a particular individual. Also, on the other hand, efforts are being made easily available to the learner with economy of time and effort. It is continuous and flexible. It is no strict control, and it has flexibility in the entry and exit, re-entry and re-exit, curriculum and maintenance of discipline, etc. Now, if I talk about non-formal education, it is continuous and flexible. Non-formal education is continuous and flexible. Also, on the other hand, non-formal education sometimes is termed to be as pre-planned, but always it is not pre-planned. Why? It is not strict. Sometimes it is not continuous. Also, on the other hand, there is no maintenance of the curriculum. There can be free entry and exit. Also, on the other hand, anytime the non-formal education can end. Formal education goes in a very constant way, but non-formal education doesn't go in a very constant way. You see, at the end of the course, students are given certificate and degrees on the basis of evaluation. Now, there is evaluation system in the non-formal education. Evaluation system is there in the non-formal education, but here one problem is that students are not getting a strict discipline. Strict education is not being provided to the students, but diplomas and degrees can be given to the students itself. If a student has completed its non-formal education, they will be awarded with diplomas and degrees. Evaluation system still exists in the non-formal education. Also, you see, if I talk about the non-formal education is being provided by the government according to the economic terms, which means it is very much free to the children itself. Also, it is being done in very less money by the other people who want to complete this course. Also, it is easily available to learner with economy of time and effort. Now, it is available to every individual with time and effort. If an individual has much time and effort, can complete this non-formal education. So, here it is the term of non-formal education. So, today we have understood about formal education, informal education and non-formal education. Now, we will be understanding the difference between formal education and informal education. Now, what is the difference between these both terms? Here you see, formal education has fixed concept and contents in its curriculum. On the other hand, non-formal education has a diversified curriculum responsive to the learner's needs. It is not non-formal, it is informal. It is informal. By mistake, I have written here, it is informal. Now you see, if I talk about formal education has fixed concepts. It has fixed concept, it has fixed guidelines. Also, the system of formal education is not at all flexible. It is a very continuous process. On the other hand, informal education has a diversified curriculum. It has a diversified curriculum, and also it is being responsive to the learners' needs. You see, if I talk about formal education is concerned in a very strict basis, but informal education is not considered in a very strict basis. On the other hand, informal education has a diversified curriculum, which means it will be provided according to the learner's needs. Formal education is time bound. It is time bound, yes. It is according to the time being provided to the student itself, but informal education is a very lifelong process. Now, the source of education are school, college, university and other institution. The source of education are open school, distance education system and part-time education. Now, formal education. Here, if I talk about the formal education, school is there, college is there, university is there. Those who are studying school, college and university, this is the part of the formal education. Now, informal education is distance education. First comes the distance education. It is one of the example of the informal education, and also part-time education. Part-time education is also an example of informal education. Also open school. Now, most of the students are there who are getting education from open school. This is an example of informal education. Also, on the other hand, formal education is imposed by the teacher on the student, and informal education encourages self-learning. Now, if I talk about formal education, it is being imposed by the teachers on the students itself. Now, the teachers will be strict on the students to get the formal education, but informal education encourages us to do self-learning. Most probably, the self-learning is an important part of informal education. Now, formal education has rigid curriculum, strict discipline and fixed goals of education. Now, informal education has a flexible curriculum, inner discipline and self-awareness program. Now, if I talk about formal education Formal education has a rigid curriculum. It has a rigid curriculum. It has a strict discipline and fixed goals of education. Now, it has a rigid curriculum. It has a fixed goals of discipline, which means it has a fixed discipline of curriculum. It has rigid goals. Also, on the other hand, the process of education is very much strict. On the other hand, if I talk about informal education, it is a flexible curriculum. It is a flexible curriculum. Also, on the other hand, inner discipline is there. Not much discipline is there in comparison to the formal education. And also there is self-awareness program. Self-awareness program is an important element of the informal education. Certificate degrees are awarded on the basis of examination. Now, in formal education, certificate degrees are being awarded on the basis of education. Certificates and degrees are being provided on the basis of examination itself. But in informal education, it is awarded on the basis of evaluation, which means in informal education, certificates can be provided also, not provided also, but it is being evaluated on the basis of the needs of the learners, if I talk about the informal education. But in formal education, degrees and certificates are being provided to the student itself. Now, formal education. In formal education, there is age limit. Very, very important. In formal education, there is age limit, but in informal education, there is no age limit. If an individual is 48 age also, they can go for the informal education. Also, on the other hand, formal education does not utilize all the human resources. Now, if I talk about formal education, it does not utilize all the human resources, which means sometimes it is not environmental friendly. On the other hand, it is based on principle of maximum utilization of human potentials. Now, if I talk about informal education, it uses the maximum of the human potentialities. Now, formal education. If I talk about formal education, whether a student is dumb, whether a student don't know how to study, still they have to go through the formal education. But in informal education, they will be looking over the student's potential, that how much an individual or a student has the potentiality to go for the informal education. So this is the difference between the formal education and the informal education. Now, scope and aim of education. Now, here we will be understanding about the scope and aim of education. Now, what is the scope and the aim of education? Here you see the scope of any subject in the area it encompasses, such as physics, chemistry, English, maths, etc., can be restricted within a definite scope or horizon. But the horizon of education is such that it cannot be restricted within a specific boundary. Now, if I talk about the scope of any subject, whether it is physics, whether it is chemistry, it has a specific boundary. It has a specific boundary. According to those boundary only, the subject has been taught to the student itself. It has definite scope or horizon. Yes, it has definite scope and horizon. Very, very important. It has definite scope and horizon. Also, if I talk about physics and chemistry, it cannot be restricted under a specific boundary. It has to be provided to each and every student. Now, physics and chemistry is being taught in class 9 and 10 students as well. Though most of the students are not good in science, but still they have to go through the subject. So, this is an example. Now, education means all-round development of an individual. It covers all aspects of human development, like physical, mental, moral, social, and spiritual. It is the development of man as a whole. Now, if I talk about education, what is the scope of the education? Which means it is the all-round development of a particular individual. Whether it is formal education or informal education, it will be getting all-round development of a particular individual. Also, it develops the physical, mental, moral, and spiritual aspects. Means it works in the following aspects, such as moral, physical, mental, and social aspects, and spiritual aspects as well. It is the development of man as a whole. In real sense, education is life, which include manner, values, moral tests, skills, and attitudes. It is a lifelong process. Education begins at birth and continues throughout our life. Now, if I talk about education, education teaches us manner, it teaches us values, it also teaches us moral values and how to live in a society, which means it teaches us adaptability. Also, on the other hand, it continues. It starts from the birth and continues till lifetime, which means up to death. This is the scope of education. Education is an evergreen process, or you can say it is a continuous process which will be continuing from birth till death. Also, it is a complete development of a man's personality. Besides social custom, condition, languages and beliefs are also included in the scope of education. Now, education is termed to be the complete development of a man's personality. Here, what do you understand by the man's personality? In a man's personality, which means developing a man's personality. Also, on the other hand, it teaches us adaptability, it teaches us different languages. Also, it teaches us how to interact with other people, communicate with other people in a proper environment. Also, the scope of education terms us in terms of beliefs, in terms of aspects of a particular society, and also social customs and traditions are also the scope of education. Now, here the scope of education refers to the breadth, comprehensiveness and variety of learning experiences to be provided in the educational process. Now, what are the other scope of education? The other scope of education is comprehensiveness and also the variety of learning experiences. Comprehensiveness and also learning the variety of experiences. You see, day-to-day life we understand, we inculcate experiences. So this is also the part of education. Also, these experiences are being provided in the educational process. Now, without experiences, we will not be understanding the meaning of education. In education, we understand values, we understand the conditions of a particular society. Also, we understand the learning experiences of a particular society. Also, the traditional values, the customs, the social beliefs are being taught us through the process of education. Also, education helps us to build the personality of a particular individual. Also, you see, it has a definite scope or horizon, but the horizon is such that it cannot be restricted within specific boundary. Now, if I talk about education, some of the subjects are there which has a specific boundary, but all the time it is not being imbibed in a particular horizon. It is not being bounded in a particular boundary. Sometimes it gives us the freedom to learn something. It gives us the freedom to get a particular knowledge of a particular subject. So this is what about education. Education is not bounded in a particular horizon. So this is the scope of education. Now, here, according to Aristotle, the main aim of education is to create sound mind in a sound body. Now, very, very important, what has Aristotle taught us? Which means the main aim of education is to have a sound mind and a sound body, which means we will not be staying in a particular horizon, but we will be amplifying ourselves to get a sound mind and a sound body. Also, on the other hand, education is purposeful, deliberate, and a planned activity which endeavors to modify the behavior of the learner. To live a meaningful life, it must have a proper direction, and this is provided by aims of education. Now, what do you mean by the other meaning of education? Which means education is a planned activity. It is a purposeful activity so that every individual can get proper lessons, proper experiences in a particular society. Also, on the other hand, education provides us a meaningful life. Education provides us a meaningful life and it gives us a proper direction. It also gives us a proper direction so that we can make our own discretion in a better way. So this is the aims of education being provided, which means it gives us a meaningful life and also it teaches us to have a proper direction in a particular life. And it is purposeful, deliberate, and a planned activity. Yes, education is purposeful, deliberate, and a planned activity. It is pre-planned. Also, with the help of education, we learn more different experiences for a sound mind and a sound body so that we can take proper direction in our life. Also, the ideals of education change from time to time and ideals are not same in different society. Now, if I talk about the ideals of the education, you see the ideals of the education changes from time to time. The ideals of the education changes from time to time and it varies from society to society. Now, my ideals is different, the other people's ideals are different. In fact, in that society, the ideals will be different. So, it varies from society, from individual to individual. Also, we are concerned with the changing world. Thus, in the wider sense, education is life and life itself is education. In most society, education may not be acceptable all the time. Therefore, there cannot be universal aim of education. Now, in the changing world, our Environment is changing, our world is modifying. As a result, education is life and life itself is education. But on the other hand, in some parts of the country, also in some parts of the society, education is not being accepted. Education is not being accepted. As a result, in some society, education is not termed to be the universal aim of education. In some societies there where education is not termed to be as the universal aim. Also, on the other hand, in some societies, education is not given a meaningful term. Education is not given a meaningful term. It varies from country to country, but in some parts of the country, some parts of the state, education has been given the maximum preferences. In some countries also, the formal education are given free. Like for example, Germany. In Germany, the master degree is completely free to the individual. So this is one of the example that I'm giving you. India, for example, self-realization and self-purification were regarded as the highest ideals of life, and the educational system was devised for the realization of these ends. Now, in India, for example, self-realization and self-purification were regarded as the highest ideals of life. If I talk about education, education teaches us self-realization. Education teaches us self-purification. These are the ideals of education. Also, on the other hand, they are devised for the realization of these ends, whereas in the modern India, more emphasis is given on democratic citizenship. Now, very, very important. If I talk about education, education gives us moral values, but here the example of the moral values come self-realization and self-purification. But in modern India, if I talk about in modern countries as well, democratic citizenship is the part of education, which means we are getting the part of the democracy. We are being the part of the democracy. So democratic citizenship or democratic learning is being provided by the education itself in modern India or in modern countries. So here you see in the modern India, more emphasis is given on the democratic citizenship. But in other parts of the country, self-realization and self-purification is being termed as the parts of education. You see, education, the term education varies from individual to society and from country to country as well. Also, on the other hand, according to Herbert Spencer, the aim of education is the preparation for complete living. Now, Herbert Spencer is the very popular philosopher. He told that education is the complete living. Education is the preparation for complete living. Yes, if you want to live in a particular country, if you want to live in a particular society, education is very much important because education helps us give meaningful life. I hope so. You have understood about the meaning of education here. Again, you see, these are some of the quotes being given by different philosophers. Plato says the purpose of education is to give the body and the soul all the beauty and perfection of which he is capable of. Now, Plato, what did Plato say? That the purpose of education to give body and soul all the beauty and perfection of which he is capable of. Yes, we human beings are isolated without education. We are isolated without education, and education gives us beauty to our body and to our soul to gain proper perfection. Now here Pestology believes that the main objective of education is not to teach but develop. Now what is the meaning of education according to Pestology, which means to develop ourselves, not to teach ourselves. Yes, education helps us in development. Now, educationist and philosopher gave different aims of education at different times to reflect the ideals of life of that society. Therefore, Percy Nunn believes that the fullest development of the individuality should be the aim of education. Now, according to Percy Nunn, what Percy Nunn says, that the fullest development of a particular education is the aim of education. Now, education, what is the aim of education? It is the fullest development of a particular individual. So, I hope so you have understood the meaning of education. Today we have understood the forms of education like formal education, informal education and the non-formal education, the difference between the formal and the informal education, and what the philosophers have defined education in different ways, the scope and the aim of education. So, if you want to know any of the courses regarding our institute, you can contact us in this number 86383 91721. And thank you for watching my video.